Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
This is KRWG Public Media, TV, radio, online. News that matters. Now, across the Mesilla Valley and the borderland, the stories that shape our community. From the KRWG Broadcast Center at New Mexico State University, this is Newsmakers.
Thank you for joining us on this special edition of Newsmakers. I'm Fred Martino. If you're interested in politics, there's a new book that may catch your eye, 10 More Doors, Politics and the Path to Change. It's a memoir by my guest, former New Mexico State Senator Dede Feldman. Dede, it is wonderful to have you with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Fred.
And I should say, for people who saw the cover of the book in our open here, of course, like almost all books, it's available on Amazon and at some local bookstores. You can call ahead to find out about that. I want to start with something that you make in the book as an important point, and I think that's why I'm starting here with this. I think it's so important. You note in the book that we cannot be bystanders. You say act, participate, vote. But as you know, many people don't even vote, let alone act or participate in other ways. I realize it's a really big question to start today. But what do you think we could do as a country to change this?
Well, everybody can do their bit. I mean, and I'm a great believer that the most important office there is that of citizen. And voting is a number one duty and privilege of citizens. But there are many other ways that you can make change and that you can make a difference in the world. And, I found it through journalism. I found it through helping other people with their campaigns. I found it through being involved with the issues. Voting is important, but it's not the only thing. Helping other people run for office, running for office yourself, acting as a mentor or a role model for other people who want to be politically active, who are interested in the issues of healthcare or the environment, climate change. Teaching is a real way of involving people in the world and so that they can learn that their actions, every one of them, make a big difference.
That is such a great point. I mean, I will never forget here in Las Cruces going into one of the high schools and seeing a really engaged civics instructor, and they even had voter registration on campus at the high school. So it was very visible to young people, and I think most people who work in this field would agree with you that education is one of those paths to changing this, to getting more people involved. Of course, as you know, voter turnout did increase in 2020. You note in the book that former President Trump motivated more people to get involved, but Trump's followers also got involved, and they haven't stopped. What do you make of how the national political scene has so deeply impacted local and state politics?
Well, it has. It has deeply influenced New Mexico politics. It used to be that legislative races and governor's races were centered on New Mexico issues. And as a result, there was sometimes agreement between Republicans and Democrats. But now it all comes down to a loyalty to a leader. And in this case, it's Trump. And it's a dangerous trend. It's a dangerous trend, and of course it has led to a great partisan divide at the national and the state level. There have been some courageous folks like Liz Cheney and others who have stood up to their party, which has basically been taken over by an individual. But just to answer your first question, That is, I think people are compelled to become involved. Young people, even more than others, because of climate change, because young people are naturally more idealistic than us cynical old people. And also because at this point and this past year, so much has seemed to be on the line. Our very democracy itself seems to be at risk. And all of the things that we had believed in so strongly, that I had believed in, and that drew me into politics, you know, the belief in democracy, the belief in a free and fair election where every person's vote counts equally to another person's vote, an independent judiciary, and media where facts were the determining factor and not just, you know, any old thing, any lie or anything that seems to be somewhat sexy. I grew up with a more a traditional media, and with this book, I wanted to recall that to people, particularly young people who already sense that, you know, the guardrails of democracy are being overrun and are becoming more involved.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned earlier, your book is entitled 10 More Doors, referring to knocking on doors. Tell me about the importance of that personal contact and what we can learn from it.
Well, New Mexico has long been famous, but dating back to Bruce King and Dave Cargo, for retail politics, where you look the voter in the eye and you ask them for your vote. And in many parts of New Mexico, that is still the case. That was my experience in coming to office, and I try to continue going door to door throughout. It's not always possible in every part of New Mexico, and campaigns are so different now. Campaigns now, you know, are not run with a clipboard in hand and going door to door like I did, but they're run with an iPhone and a program that is basically made up by consultants from out of state that take a poll to figure out what are the major issues, and then train the candidates to make their message fit what the voters want to hear. It tends to tends to focus on wedge issues that drive people apart rather than you know, the actual work of governing, which requires compromise, which requires reaching across the aisle and actually getting things done. We're seeing gridlock now as a result of the way we run our campaigns.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, you describe yourself as a progressive. Much has been said about a stronger progressive influence on the Democratic Party. But progress, as you know, is really difficult. If you were advising progressive Democrats, what are the really big points that you would want to get across?
Well, ironically, I would give the same advice to Republicans and people on the right as well, and that is that you have to play nicely with other people, and remember that you're going to be in the minority. Sometimes you're going to be in the majority. Sometimes, and so you have to take things issue by issue. You don't always get your first choice, and you sometimes have to take half a loaf, because if you hold out for the big progressive holy grails, you know, universal health coverage, Medicare for all, or public financing of all elections, you're going to be sorely disappointed. So why not make allies with those that do have some common values? And in New Mexico and all over, people have forgotten, I think, that the things that unite us are greater than the things that divide us.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about more about compromise coming up. First, though, I want you to talk about your career in New Mexico politics, where some said, as a Pennsylvania native, it would be impossible for you to get elected, but you overcame that. Tell me about that, and how much did your love for New Mexico, which really comes through in this book, help you?
Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, I came to New Mexico in 1975, and I came with an appreciation that New Mexico was different from every other state in the Union, including Pennsylvania. And I wanted to learn about it. And my husband and I moved into the North Valley of Albuquerque, which at that time, 1975, was a heavily Hispanic neighborhood. And we set about doing what a lot of people were doing in the 1970s, which was diving into solar energy. We forget about how New Mexico in the 1970s was really pioneering solar energy, specifically passive solar energy. And my husband and I started retrofitting and building a solar house in the North, solar adobe. And my husband has a great love for adobe. And we were at that time really in love with the kind of vernacular architecture of New Mexico. And so we started laying adobes out in our front yard. And we couldn't afford a mixer. And so we had a big mud pit, which we were mixing mud in and laying adobes. And our neighbors kept driving by and seeing us there and, wondering what these crazy gringos were up to. They finally stopped and taught us the right way to lay adobes and the right way to get latillas from the mountains and put them on our ceilings. And that was, we fell in love with New Mexico. And I think these folks really adopted us into their community. Now, running for office is a different thing, however. And so many people told me, well, you're an Anglo in a Hispanic area. You're never going to win because voting is based on ethnicity. And so I worried about that. But in New Mexico, especially during the 80s and 90s, it was very difficult for women anyway. And there were very few openings because of the way our districts are drawn. People that get into office are usually in safe districts, and they stay there for ages and ages and ages. So there's usually not an opening. But I decided I would give it the old college try. And I decided that, well, maybe they might not like my last name, but maybe if I go door to door and introduce myself, they would see that they have nothing to fear from me. And so I did that. And in 1995, I ran for the city council, and I lost by 9 votes to a 4-term incumbent, which was really quite surprising to a lot of people, including me.
Yeah. Well, that would encourage you because you came so close. And I love this story because it's throughout the book as well, perseverance in so many things, not just running for office, but getting legislation passed.
Right.
You also had a lot of good background, though, because you were also a journalist, and you tell stories about journalism as a path to change. One of those stories is about a uranium company that could have polluted an arroyo, but your reporting on that stopped the plan. And so tell me about that.
Well, that was the era when the pen really was mightier than the sword. Remember, the 1970s and the 1980s were the golden age of journalism. This is when we believed, and Woodward and Bernstein did bring down a president. The Pentagon Papers and the coverage of the Vietnam War eventually led to its end after too long, but the facts mattered. And so I was, and my father was a newspaper man. So I was brought up with that idea. And when I came to New Mexico, I joined a small underground alternative newspaper, and we poked our nose into other people's business, and one of them was uranium mining. Another was Los Alamos. How safe was Los Alamos with all of the disposal practices left over from the 1960s? And actually, there were very few people looking into that at that time. And so writing it, and then I was able to get my story published in the New York Times because this one particular company in New Mexico, Bolcom Resources, and there's a building named for them in Santa Fe now. They were going to build their uranium mill on top of an arroyo. And so that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
But nobody in New York knew that. And that's where the uranium was going to go. It was going to go to LILCO, the Long Island Lighting Company. And so the Times was interested. And so we got together and wrote the story, and
it made a difference. I love the story because you point out in the book, and this happens so often, that without the journalism, this issue wasn't even really on the radar. Most people didn't even know about it. As you know, a lot of people are worried about the loss of many journalists and the lack of investigative reporting.
Yes.
How do you think we can change this?
Well, it's a very, very serious trend. Two of them. One is that people, ordinary readers or viewers or consumers of news, have lost the difference between what is an editorial opinion and what is actually facts. And that's the kind of thing we need to be taught in high schools through civics classes or English classes or social studies classes, because those lines are really blurred.
Yeah,
now,
so more media literacy. Do you think we also can partially solve this problem through philanthropy? We're seeing a lot more foundations.
Yes.
You think that's a good thing? Okay.
I do think that the model of a daily newspaper and 3 major TV channels is now obsolete, and yet there is nothing but the worst kind of competition that has arisen. That is not journalism. That is something else. But I'm very encouraged in New Mexico because we have some independent e-newspapers and blogs. Started down there in your part of the woods with Heath Hausman and the New Mexico Independent. And now we have New Mexico In Depth. We have Searchlight. We have Source New Mexico. We have The Paper, which is a e-newspaper and a print newspaper in Albuquerque that took over from the Weekly Alibi.
Yeah, it's really been amazing to see the growth. Yeah. And you're mentioning a number of websites. Searchlight New Mexico In Depth are both partners of KRWG Public Media.
Yeah.
We featured them on our website and even through some programming. I want to talk about something else before we run out of time. Time goes by so quickly, and that is party politics. You tell stories of battles between Democrats in the book, and also Democrats supporting each other when maybe they should have backed new leadership.
Yeah.
But you also note that on the national scene, Senator Mitch McConnell has been very successful in keeping Republicans together in order to preserve power. How do you strike a balance on this? It really seems impossible at times.
Well, the comparison that I draw in the book is in a chapter called Lessons in Loyalty. And the comparison I made was between the New Mexico Senate in the 1990s and the U.S. Senate under Mitch McConnell. In the 1990s, Senator Manny Aragon was the president pro tem of the Senate, and a great many Democrats, or the majority of the Democrats, were loyal to him to a fault. In the same way that the Republicans now are loyal to Mitch McConnell and were to President Trump, and allow all kinds of bad things to go on because of this personal loyalty to one person. And so it takes a lot to overthrow that kind of entrenched power. And sometimes these people stay in power for years because of redistricting and the way districts are drawn to favor incumbents and to allow them to go on, and no one challenges them because they're fearful. They're fearful that they'll be thrown out of the party. They'll get an opponent.
And what was it that allowed Democrats, some Democrats, to come together to change the situation you described with Mr. Aragon?
The courage of one man. The courage of one man. That was Senator Richard Romero, who said, this is wrong. We cannot go on like this anymore. It's very much like a Liz Cheney situation. And we've got to, and I don't care what happens to me. This is just an elected office. This is a moral question. And so he challenged Senator Aragon and won by one vote. But it was only because he allied with the Republicans. And the consequences of that were kind of dire. They were not dire immediately. And actually, the Senate flourished for the following 3 years, I would say. But after that, it became much more likely for a coalition of conservative Democrats and Republicans to be able to control the Senate.
I want to talk about a related issue before we run out of time to coalitions, developing compromise. So something really important in the book. You talk about failures in advancing major legislation, but then after failing, working on incremental change. Lots of elected officials, though, as you know, seem to have a problem with this. It's all or nothing for them.
Yeah, but you don't get your first choice the whole time.
Yeah.
In Washington right now. And so I learned very quickly that I was not going to get universal health care as I had hoped for. But that doesn't mean you fold up your tent and go home. You look for incremental victories, and they can be great. They can be forcing insurance companies to cover a 48-hour stay for women who have had mammograms. They had be forcing health insurance companies to say why and how they are raising their rates and on whom. They are forcing insurance companies to treat women equally to men, patients. And so you can't give up. You can't give up on the little things. If you can't get public financing of campaigns so that it really levels the playing field, well, maybe you can get campaign contribution caps. Maybe you can get an ethics commission. And so you just have to keep going, keep persevering, keep knocking, and you'll prevail over the long run. It's a long game.
And of course, in our final minutes here, Dede, you're talking there about a lot of information in the book about your fight for healthcare legislation in New Mexico. Some would say the Affordable Care Act on the national level is a great example of this idea. President Obama and Democratic representatives and senators could not even get a public insurance option included in that bill, but they moved it forward rather than starting over. And of course, they ultimately were successful in getting the Affordable Care Act passed. You also worked in that fight, the national fight for the ACA, the Affordable Care Act.
Yes. I was part of a group of state legislators that Obama tapped to help him get the bill through at the state level and to find out what our experiences were at the state level. And so it was just that we were used to accepting half a loaf. We all were for the public option, but it was not adopted because of one man, essentially. And it's a similar situation in Washington today. And yet they passed the bill and it became the law of the land. And once it becomes the law of the land, it's a different kettle of fish, and it becomes harder to repeal. And so then you have that to build on the next time. And that's what's happening now.
Yeah, and so timely to talk about it right now because, of course, Democrats nationally are working on so many of these issues that have been fought at the local and state level, from paid sick leave and paid family leave to expanding help for child care, all of these fundamental changes that are kind of taken for granted sometimes in other countries. Well, this is a great discussion. I wish we had an hour. The half hour flew by. The book is called 10 More Doors, Politics and the Path to Change. It's a memoir by Dede Feldman. Dede, it is so great that you had a chance to join us today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Fred. I really had fun.
Me too. That is our time for now. Join us this week on KRWG Radio every weekday. It's morning edition, 5 to 9, fresh air at 11, followed by Here and Now, noon to 2, and All Things Considered, 4 to 7. KRWG News is always online at krwg.org, and we'd love to hear from you. Email us with your story ideas and video submissions. The address is feedback@nmsu.edu. For all of us at KRWG News, I'm Fred Martino. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Newsmakers.